I'm Helen Carter, and at 59, I thought I'd already lived through the worst kind of heartbreak a woman could face. I lost my husband, Daniel, 4 years ago. I buried both of my parents before I turned 50. I learned how to cook dinner, for one, how to sleep on the left side of the bed, how to pretend I didn't feel lonely in my own home. But nothing in my quiet little life prepared me for the moment I woke up from a short afternoon nap and realized someone had cut my hair while I slept. At first, I didn't understand what I was seeing. The soft weight on my shoulder felt wrong. When I reached up, my fingers brushed against rough, uneven ends. My scalp felt cold. Strands of hair were stuck to my cheek and shirt, and all around me, on the living room rug, there were pieces, long, dark pieces that used to be part of me. My heartbeat thudded so loud it drowned out the ceiling fan. I stood up slowly, every step crunching against stray strands on the floor. I followed the faint sound of metal tapping against the kitchen counter. And there she was, my daughter-in-law. Cassie, leaning back with a pair of silver scissors dangling from her fingers. She didn't even bother hiding them. She simply smirked. "That's how you learn your place," she said, as if she were telling me dinner was ready. My son, Mark, sat at the table staring at his phone, guilt pooling behind his eyes but never forming into an apology. When he finally spoke, his voice was small. "Mom, Cassie's right. You're almost 60. Long hair doesn't look right anymore. She was just helping. You needed a lesson. A lesson as if I were a child, as if my body were theirs to control, as if the home I opened to them, the money I helped them with, gave them the right to strip something from me without consent. If anyone had told me this would be the moment my whole life shifted, I wouldn't have believed them. But 3 days after this, those same 2 people who cut my hair stood outside my front door begging me to forgive them. Before everything collapsed between us, my house used to feel like a place suspended outside of time. I'd wake each morning to the soft creak of the lemon tree branches brushing against the window, the smell of freshly brewed coffee drifting from the kitchen, and the quiet hum of a life that had settled into something steady, something bearable. Losing Daniel left a hollow space that never truly closed, but routine helped soften the edges. I didn't expect happiness anymore, but I learned to live with a gentle kind of peace. When Mark called one afternoon to say their rent had gone up again and Cassie's hours at the dental office had been cut, I didn't even let him finish his sentence. I told him they could move in temporarily, just until they got ahead again. The words felt natural, as if this was what any mother would do. I imagined dinners together, laughter returning to hallways that had held only silence for years. Cassie's thank you felt polite but distant, a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Still, I assumed we just needed time to warm up to one another. Families grow in strange, uneven ways. They moved in on a warm Friday afternoon. Mark carried boxes filled with their mismatched kitchenware, and Cassie followed, rolling a suitcase with wheels that squeaked every time it hit the tile. I offered them the larger guest room at the end of the hall. Cassie looked around, taking in the antique dresser I'd kept since the early days of my marriage, the handmade quilt folded neatly at the foot of the bed. The soft blue curtains Daniel always said reminded him of the ocean. Her nose twitched almost imperceptibly, as though the room carried a scent only she could detect, something old, something outdated. I tried not to take it personally. At first, the house felt fuller in a way that was almost comforting. Mark helped repair the porch light that had flickered for months. Cassie accompanied me to the grocery store once, walking slightly ahead, her steps impatient, her eyes scanning price labels with a kind of restless calculation. On that trip, she said I should try almond milk instead of cream, claiming it would be better for someone my age. I laughed it off and tossed my usual half and half into the cart. It didn't occur to me then that comments like that were seeds waiting to sprout. The first real shift happened slowly, like a change in weather you only notice when it's too late to bring the plants inside. One evening, I made roast chicken and mashed potatoes, something that used to be Mark's favorite. As I set the plates down, Cassie frowned at the buttery mashed potatoes as though I was serving poison. She nudged her fork into the food with the hesitation of someone examining a suspicious insect. "Do you always cook like this?" she asked, glancing around the table. Her tone wasn't curious. It was judgment wrapped in the thin disguise of politeness. "It's just heavy. People our age try to eat cleaner." Our age. She was 28. Mark shot her a quick look, a silent plea to drop it, but he didn't exactly defend me either. He rubbed the back of his neck and said, "She's just trying to be healthy. Mom." I pressed a smile onto my face and continued eating even though my appetite had vanished halfway through her sentence. After dinner, I began gathering the plates, but Cassie swept them up first, carrying them to the sink with exaggerated efficiency. "I'll handle these," she said, her voice clipped. "You don't need to strain yourself after cooking all this rich food." She didn't meet my eyes. I wasn't sure if she was doing me a favor or sending me a message. The next morning, I found her in the living room flipping through a glossy real estate magazine. Pictures of downtown condos with glass balconies and marble counters filled each page. She circled one with a pen. "Imagine living here," she said, more to herself than to me. "Some people hold on to houses that are way too big for them. If they'd just sell, they could finally have something modern." I felt a tiny pinch in my chest, but I walked past her quietly, convincing myself she wasn't talking about me or my home or the memories I guarded within it. But little things kept piling up. Groceries became something I covered more often than not. Gas money somehow became my responsibility as well. When Mark lost another job, the weekly transfers started. Cassie never acknowledged them, but she didn't stop spending either. Packages arrived at the door almost every other day, each one carrying shoes, skincare, or something else she claimed she needed. I tried to keep the peace, telling myself that helping my son was worth the discomfort. I told myself that families go through phases, that they'd repay my kindness eventually, that I wasn't being taken advantage of. Mothers have a way of lying to themselves when the truth feels too painful to speak aloud. The moment everything shifted came late one afternoon. I was sorting the mail at the kitchen table when a folded sheet of paper slipped out from between a stack of coupons and bills. At first, I thought it was one of Mark's job applications. But then I recognized Cassie's handwriting, sharp, slanted, unmistakably hers. It wasn't a resume. It was math, numbers, estimates, notes about selling my house. At the top, written in a neat line, were the words, "Estimated sale value of Helen's property." Something inside me went still, as if the air around me had frozen. I told myself maybe it wasn't what it looked like. Maybe it was a misunderstanding. But the neat columns of figures told a different story, one that made my stomach twist. I folded the paper carefully and slid it into my drawer next to Daniel's letters, feeling a tremor run through me. It was the first moment I felt something darkening under the surface of our home, something that would break open soon, and I had no idea how soon that hello darkness would come. The night after I found that paper, the house felt colder than usual, as if the draft slipping through the windows had learned a new purpose. Mark and Cassie came home late, laughing about something on Cassie's phone, their voices echoing through the hallway. I stood in the kitchen pouring hot water into my mug, watching the steam rise and swirl like a warning I didn't yet have the courage to speak aloud. I kept thinking of that sheet of paper tucked in my drawer, the numbers written in Cassie's confident pen strokes, the way she had circled a downtown condo like it was already hers. When I went to bed that night, sleep refused to come. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured Cassie's fingers tracing my walls, her gaze drifting over the furniture Daniel built, her eyes calculating the value of a life she hadn't lived. By dawn, I realized something inside me had shifted. I wasn't just uncomfortable anymore. I was afraid of what they were capable of, but fear is a slow poison. It doesn't kill your spirit in one blow. It seeps into the cracks, softening your resolve. So the next morning, instead of confronting them, I tried pretending nothing had changed. I made coffee, scrambled eggs, and listened as Cassie breezed into the kitchen in her bright workout clothes, humming a song I didn't recognize. She didn't look at me when she reached for the almond milk, but she said, "We should talk about modernizing this place. Helen, it could be worth so much more if you updated it." She wasn't even hiding it anymore. I said nothing. My silence tasted bitter. Later that morning, when she and Mark left for errands, I grabbed my keys and drove to Maria's salon. I didn't want a haircut. I wanted a mirror that didn't lie. When Maria saw me, she immediately reached for my shoulders as if she thought I might collapse. I hadn't realized my face was that pale. "Sit," she said gently, guiding me to the chair. "Tell me what's going on." I didn't start with the paper. I started with the feelings I didn't have names for. The tension, the comments, the money. Maria listened quietly, her eyes softening with every detail. When I finally told her about the calculations and the circled condo, she let out a quiet, pained exhale. "Helen," she said, "they're not planning a future. They're planning yours, and you're not part of it." Her words sank into me with the weight of truth. I stared at my reflection, the faint lines beneath my eyes, the hair that still carried the scent of the conditioner Daniel used to love. I didn't know whether to cry or scream. On my way home, I pulled over near the park Daniel and I used to walk through in the summers. I sat in the car for a long time, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I thought about all the small ways I'd let myself shrink, how I had accepted disrespect as part of being needed, how I had mistaken silence for peace. When I finally made it back to the house, Joyce was watering her peonies next door. She waved at me, but something in my expression must have alarmed her because she set her watering can down and crossed the lawn. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, her voice low. I didn't tell her everything. I told her enough. Enough for her to frown. Enough for her to place a hand on her hip the way she always did when she was ready to fight for someone who wouldn't fight for themselves. "Helen?" "Sweetheart," she said softly, "this isn't about generosity anymore. They're taking advantage of you. And if you don't stop them now, you won't recognize your own life in a year." I asked her what she thought I should do. She didn't hesitate. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small business card, worn at the edges. "My attorney," she said. "He's fair, he's discreet, and he won't let anyone push you around." I stared at the card for a long moment. The name printed on it, Mr. Green, looked foreign, intimidating, like a step into a world I never wanted to enter. But then I thought about Cassie's voice telling me my house wasn't modern enough, about Mark asking for money without a hint of shame, about the paper calculating my home's value without my consent. That's when something steadied in me, a quiet resolve, a faint trembling spark of self-respect rising after being buried for far too long. I didn't tell Mark or Cassie where I was going the next morning. I just grabbed my purse, locked the door behind me, and drove straight to the address printed on the card. I didn't know it yet, but that drive was the first real step toward reclaiming my life. Mr. Green's office sat in a modest brick building near the courthouse, the kind of place you'd miss if you blinked while driving past. When I stepped inside, the air smelled faintly of leather and old paper. A receptionist greeted me with a warm smile before guiding me to a small room lined with bookshelves. I felt strangely out of place, like someone who had stepped into a life meant for a stronger woman. But when Mr. Green entered, a tall man with silver hair and eyes that seemed to measure truth without judgment, I felt my shoulders loosen just slightly. I told him everything, not just about the haircut or the insults or the money. I told him about the list I'd found, the circled condo, the way Cassie's voice had shifted from polite to possessive over the months. As I spoke, he didn't interrupt. He took notes with deliberate strokes of his pen, his brows lifting only once when I described waking up to find pieces of my hair scattered across my chest. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair. "Helen," he said, "you've been far more patient than most people would be. But patience doesn't mean surrender. Your home is legally yours, and you have every right to set boundaries, especially when the people living under your roof are exploiting you." The word exploiting stung, mostly because I had avoided admitting it to myself. He explained my options carefully, walking me through the tenant-at-will laws in our state, how eviction notices worked, what protections I had, what steps were required. He made everything sound straightforward, but the weight of what he was saying pressed down on me. I felt as though I were standing at the edge of a cliff, staring down at a drop I wasn't sure I had the courage to take. He drafted the 30-day notice. My name sat at the bottom of the page in bold letters, sharp and solid. When he slid the paper toward me to sign, my hand trembled, not from doubt, though doubt lingered, but from grief. Grief for the boy I had raised, the boy I once carried on my hip, the boy who used to leave crayon drawings on the fridge. I signed anyway. The pen made a soft scratching sound, final and irreversible. "We'll deliver it together," he said gently. "You shouldn't face them alone." The next afternoon, I waited in the living room while the sun dipped low behind the lemon tree outside. Shadows stretched across the hardwood floors, and my heartbeat seemed to echo beneath them. Mark and Cassie were in the kitchen preparing dinner, their voices rising and falling in casual conversation. It struck me how normal everything looked: the clinking of utensils, the soft sizzle of onions in a pan, the illusion of family. Then came a firm knock on the door. Cassie barely glanced up. "Could you get that, Helen?" I walked slowly down the hallway, each step heavy with the knowledge that nothing after this moment would be the same. When I opened the door, Mr. Green stood there, holding a manila envelope. He nodded once, a quiet signal of support. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Carter," he said politely, loud enough for the kitchen to hear. "May I come in?" Cassie poked her head around the corner, her posture stiffening when she saw the envelope. Mark followed, wiping his hands on a dish towel. Confusion etched across his face. "What's going on?" he asked. Mr. Green handed the envelope to Cassie first. She opened it, her eyes skimming the words. Her smirk vanished, her face drained of color, then flushed a furious red. "You can't be serious," she whispered, her voice tightening. This is an eviction notice." Mark grabbed the paper from her, his expression shifting from disbelief to panic. "Mom, what is this?" I felt my breath loosen. For the first time in months, I stood tall. "It's exactly what it looks like. You have 30 days to move out." Cassie stepped forward, her voice cracking with indignation. "We're your family. You can't just throw us out because of a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" My voice trembled, not with fear, but with restrained emotion. "You cut my hair while I slept. You planned to sell my home. You used my money as if it belonged to you." Mark swallowed hard. "We were just trying to build a future. We didn't mean—" "You meant everything you did," I said softly. "You just didn't expect consequences." Cassie threw the paper onto the coffee table, the pages fluttering like wounded birds. "You'll regret this. You'll end up alone. Helen. Completely alone." I held her gaze without flinching. "I've been alone before. What I won't be is disrespected in my own home." Silence fell between us, thick as fog. Mark looked at me with something fragile. Fear. Shame. Maybe both. Cassie stormed down the hall, slamming the bedroom door so hard a picture frame rattled on the wall. Mark lingered in the living room, staring at the eviction notice as if hoping it would rewrite itself. "Mom," he whispered. I didn't know it would come to this." "Yes," I said, my voice steady. "You did. You just didn't think I'd stand up for myself." He nodded faintly, then followed Cassie, leaving me alone with the fading scent of onions and the quiet thrum of my own heartbeat. When Mr. Green left, closing the front door with a soft click, the house fell silent, a silence filled not with loneliness, but with something sharper. Resolve. The next 30 days would test all of us. I could feel it already. The 30 days that followed felt like walking through a storm I had created myself. Mark and Cassie spoke to me only when necessary, their voices clipped and tense. They packed slowly at first, then frantically as the deadline approached. The night they loaded the last of their boxes into Mark's car, Cassie didn't say goodbye. She slammed the trunk shut, muttered something under her breath, and climbed in without looking back. Mark lingered on the porch, his shoulders sagging as though the weight of the past months finally leaned on him. "I'm sorry," he murmured, barely audible. I nodded, but I didn't reach for him. For the first time, he had to walk away on his own. The house was painfully quiet after they left. Some evenings I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, staring at the empty driveway. I kept wondering if I had done the right thing, or if I'd pushed too hard, too late. Joyce visited often, bringing muffins or just sitting beside me in silence. "It hurts because you're a good mother," she told me, "but good mothers aren't doormats." Weeks passed before I heard anything about them again. Then one night, my phone rang at 2 a.m. A nurse from the hospital told me Mark had been in a car accident. His injuries weren't life-threatening, but he was frightened and had listed me as his emergency contact. At the hospital, I found him sitting upright in the bed, one arm in a sling, his face pale. When he saw me, something inside him seemed to break. He reached for me with his uninjured hand, tears filling his eyes. "Mom, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry for everything." For the first time in months, I held him. He cried like a boy again, but this time he didn't hide behind excuses or blame. When he finally calmed, he whispered. "Cassie left. As soon as things got hard, she left." I brushed his hair back gently, the way I used to when he was small. "You're going to be okay," I said, "but you have to learn to stand on your own." I didn't let him move back in. Instead, I paid 3 months of rent for a modest apartment near his new job and stocked his fridge with groceries. "This is the last time I carry you," I told him softly. "After this, you walk." And he did, slowly at first. Then, with growing steadiness, he worked long hours, saved money, and called me every Sunday. Months later, he invited me to dinner, his treat. Sitting across from him in a small diner, watching him proudly hand the waiter his own card, I felt something warm settle in my chest. A year after the eviction, on my 60th birthday, he stood in my backyard with a bouquet of lilies and a shy smile. "You saved me," he said, "and I didn't even know I needed saving." As the sun dipped behind the lemon tree Daniel planted long ago, I realized my life had finally returned to me, quiet, imperfect, but mine. And for the first time in a long time, I felt whole.